Okay, so the next speaker is Dirk Wallace, who's a senior environment researcher at FAR, and he's based in our Hamilton office, so he's relatively up to date with what's happening in the Waikato region. And his research predominantly focuses on soil quality and sustainable soil management, but today he's got the joy of talking about compliance. So he's going to give us a little bit of an update on compliance, what we know and how it's going to affect maize. So thank you, Dirk.
Thank you, Alison. And thank you all for staying in the room when the topic of compliance came up. We're going to aim to make this as pain-free as possible, because I acknowledge it's a bit of a stress, and just want to provide some messages here around what's changed in the world of compliance and what you can do to keep up with it and get through it, to be honest, because I guess the last session's really highlighted the market requirements for us as growers and what we need to achieve. So yeah, just want to update you. So this is kind of where I think maize growing kind of looks a little bit like this. It's a bit of a juggling act. You've got a lot to think about as it is. Every growing season you're considering your forecasts, so how much you're going to get paid and how much rain's going to fall out of the sky. Your contracts, which you know, are variable as they are. And then your agronomy, so when are you going to plant, what are you going to plant, how much nutrients are you going to use, all of those questions. So you've got a lot of chainsaws being juggled at the same time, and compliance can often feel like an additional chainsaw that's got to be thrown in the mix there and makes the whole circus act a lot more challenging. So really today I want to talk through that chainsaw, what it looks like, and how to add it to the mix to make the juggle a little bit easier. So hopefully this should take less than 10 minutes, but yeah, just want to update around what's changed, how to get your head around it, and how to move forward. So what's the pathway to get started if you haven't started on your compliance journey yet? Now we all know there's been a bit of a shift in government, and that's going to result in some changes in what we have to do as growers to be compliant at a national level. We've shifted from the previous Labor government to the new coalition that we've got up there. And the other day I was talking to a grower around compliance, and his comment to me was, so hasn't it all gone away now? Aren't we in the clear? But my message today is that that's not really the case. We've seen some changes be implemented, but I just want to slowly step through those and tell you kind of what they mean in hopefully non-politician speak. So at a national level, we know that the new coalition is aiming to replace the national policy statement for fresh water. They're aiming to improve farm environment plans, and they're aiming to change the way that resource use is consented. So moving away from the policies that Labor put in place to something better for resource management. Now, what does that actually mean? When I look at that, I see that the word replace doesn't actually mean remove. So we need to be a little bit careful here. Farm planning doesn't look like it's going to go away. So if it's here to stay, we need to think about how we get our heads around it and move forward with it. The other aha moment I've had in this whole compliance journey is around national policy statements. So these are these things around our freshwater farm plan obligations and things you might have heard about, which the national government sets, and then the regional council has to take up. But the point I want to make here is that those national regulations are your minimum bar. So that's what every regional council has to achieve. They're not the maximum. So changes at a national level are important, and they may be able to reduce your compliance requirements at that level, but you really need to understand what's going on in your region, because your regional requirements are the ones you have to adhere to. So my message here is talk to your council. Make sure you know what you need to do in your catchment and your area to meet the requirements. The other thing I found as I looked through the coalition agreements from the new national government is that there's actually no formal changes made to greenhouse gas reporting or pricing, which is something we've been talking about. It's been coming on for a long time. There was a lot of statements made on the campaign trail about how changes would be made, but we haven't seen anything in paper yet. So for the time being, emission reporting and pricing is still looking like it's moving ahead. So that's quite a short summary of what's happening at the national level. This is an evolving space, but just wanted to let you know what's going on there. Next, I want to move to regional level. And the major one we've really got to tackle as maize growers is around freshwater farm planning. So the first two regions where that was going to be implemented were in the Waikato and Southland. And as far as I currently know, that is still going ahead. Both of those regional councils have freshwater farm plans live now. And in the absence of any national change, that's what's happening. So if you're sitting there thinking, all right, I might need to do something now, and you want to know if you're in or out, it's really around the size of your operation. If you've got 20 hectares of arable land or 5 hectares of horticultural land, you'll need to start thinking about a freshwater farm plan in the future. Again, talk to your council, or at the least someone who has. Look for some reliable sources of information there, and there are plenty of staff at the council whose job it is to support you as maize growers to get on board with this. So that kind of covers off what changes we're seeing at a national level and a regional level. But as we've heard this morning, one of the major drivers moving forward is actually what the market requires of us. And although that's been touched on by both Margaret and Raewyn, I just wanted to re-emphasise a couple of examples around our opportunities as maize growers to help the people that we produce product for. Because at the end of the day, we grow maize so that it can become something else. And we need to be conscious of what those other people are trying to achieve. So market requirements, like we heard, could be one of the major drivers. And I was kind of thinking about this before when I was sitting in the audience. Some of those drivers are a lot bigger than the drivers that we have in New Zealand. So Nestle, for example, they pitched up that their total emission is 92 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Does anyone know what New Zealand's total tonnes of CO2 equivalent is? I love deathly silence, but it's 77. So Nestle is bigger than New Zealand. So it kind of gives you some perspective as to the importance of those market pushes versus what might happen at a national level. And to bring that back to a supplier, potential supplier to Nestle, we know that the dairy industry is setting these goals. Fonterra has set goals very similar to what Nestle wants to achieve, where they want to reduce their emissions intensity by 30% by the year 2030. Now, emissions can be a whole degree in itself in some ways, and you kind of need to know how to speak the language to understand it. I just wanted to point out that Fonterra's goal is based around an intensity reduction. That means they want to produce less emissions per tonne of product. So it doesn't take too many cents to go, okay, there's two pathways to that. They can produce more, or they can reduce the amount of emissions they produce per product. But after listening to Raewyn's talk, it seems like the real pathway for them is reducing the amount of emissions. And they've actually laid out a roadmap to achieve this. This is just a screen grab from that roadmap, and this is around their farming emissions. These are all the sources of the farming emissions, but what I wanted to highlight was this box here, which is around brought in feed to the farming system, and that accounts for 10% of their losses. In their document, they identify that getting the quantity and quality of feed right will improve a farm's emission footprint, which is their goal. And to me, that just screams of a maize opportunity. Because essentially we are the experts in providing the right quality feed for them and growing it for them so they can achieve their goals. So in terms of regulatory requirements and compliance and all of this, this is where it mixes in with business, and I think this is where we need to prick up our ears and see what we can do. So those are the, I guess, some of the compliance changes or things we're dealing with over that national, regional and market level. Your head might be a little bit exploding now, but we don't ever get anywhere in one big jump. We've got to formulate a process to get through this all. And that's why I want to put forward a pathway to get on the track of being compliant and getting all your numbers in the right place. Just like this, it's like eating the elephant, really. You need to split it apart into its component bits. Do it one bit at a time, and do it when you've got the time to do it. There's no use jumping into this space when you're making all of those other decisions and juggling all of those other jobs on the farm. Wait till you've got the time to put into it, because it's something that you will thank yourself in the future if you get working on it when you've got the time to focus. So first step is get your head around it. This sounds simple, but go through it like a process. Think about what is relevant for your farm. Make a checklist. What do you need nationally? What do you need regionally? What do your markets need? If you are growing irrigated maize, what does your irrigation scheme need? And potentially, what is your catchment trying to achieve? If you can understand all of those components, you're really on your way to pulling together a way of tackling compliance. And to be honest, probably most of you are having those conversations as you go anyway. So you're probably nearly there in terms of your understanding of what's required. The next step is to build your foundation. And I say that because the numbers that you have on farm will form probably roughly 80% of what you need to provide in terms of compliance. So things that you might be asked for, like annual stock numbers, fertiliser input, agrochemical applications, water usage if you've got irrigation, your greenhouse gas number, I know Tori talked about that before, information on lease agreements. If you've got all of that information in a place where you can get to it and understand it, then you're on the right path. And as you build that foundation, you kind of get added value from it. So one example of this is if you have your stock numbers and your fertiliser information in one place, you can very easily pull up something like eCheck, which is the FAR greenhouse gas calculator, and work out your greenhouse gas number in less than 30 minutes. So building those numbers together and then allowing different stories to be told from them is a really important step on your compliance journey. Once you have this information, you want to start telling your story. The next step is to start pulling it together into a farm plan. I just wanted to point out that we have a newsletter coming up soon, in our From the Ground Up FAR newsletter, which actually tells the story of a grower in the Waipa catchment and his journey with his freshwater farm plan. So I'd really encourage you to read through that and have a look at what a grower's perspective on this is. And just wanted to emphasise that he pointed out that the value of having everything in one place made the whole job a lot easier and a lot less expensive. So good value in that. So in summary, getting through compliance is really about knowing what you need for your farm, also knowing what your customer needs, of course, and being brave and asking for help if you don't know what you need. There's a lot of opinions out there, so try to go to someone that's as close to the source as possible. The likes of ourselves or the regional councils are always there and available. Collect your information and keep it in a place you can find it. Can't stress this enough, and always a struggle even as a researcher is to have good management of information. But yeah, always being able to find it when you're asked for it is a hugely valuable thing. And that is really it. I wanted to keep it short and sweet because there's not a huge amount to update you on, but happy to take any questions, and thank you for your time.
Okay. Any questions for Dirk? Can we get a microphone? Sorry, just, yeah.
Is there a sort of area where if you've gone from full cultivation to strip tilling, is there a bonus there that you can add into your plan?
Yeah, so as you go through farm planning, you're kind of telling the story of your business, and you could identify risks. Say, for example, you have a risk of soil runoff into fresh waterways or something. A bonus there is moving towards a practice like strip tillage or no-till, because you're likely to lose less soil. So it kind of gives you that opportunity to say, identified a risk, and this is what I'm doing about it to alleviate it. So that's basically what they want you to be telling in your farm planning story.
Okay, one at the back there.
My question is to you, Dirk, Alison, and possibly Raywin. Comes down to compliance and greenhouse gas emissions, and regarding methane. Now, there's not two schools of thought. There's one school of thought, and the science was done in the 60s and 70s, and there's no way that methane, which affects greenhouse gas emissions, global warming, because it was done, the initial test, that the Paris Accord Agreement believes in. Nestle, FAR, the government, and the left of centre greenies we've got to share this planet with, believe the test was done in a dry laboratory with dry air, not the real atmosphere, which is full of water up there, and the methane will not absorb into the ozone. And we could release 1,000 times more methane from stock in New Zealand than we're currently doing and have no effect. So my question is, why have we not believed the truth on methane, that it does not affect, like it affects everyone in this room? We've been hoodwinked into believing that methane's the biggest polluter. It's not. So what's FAR's answer to that?
I can give that a whirl if you want, Alison. Yeah, so obviously each greenhouse gas has a different impact on warming. We can all agree there. And nationally, we've actually got a different target for methane emissions to account for that. It's recognised that methane's time in the atmosphere is less than the time of nitrous oxide and CO2. So that's why the government has set a different target for emission reduction. There's two methods for calculating warming effect of methane, and there is considerable debate about which method should be used. In terms of what we have at the moment, we're still using, not to bore you too much, and you probably already know this, but we're still using what has been recommended by the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. As the science comes to hand and any changes need to be made, then that's what we have a Climate Change Commission for. They can review that science and allow changes at a national level to happen. But I think you can't ignore methane emissions themselves. We could go down this a lot further, but I think I would be happy to leave it there. We do recognise they're different gases. The goal for everyone is to reduce warming. We're all in agreement there. And the role that FAR's playing with its research is allowing you as growers to know what your numbers are, so you can actually have these discussions. So if your business has a significant component of methane, you can take that to the table and have those debates with whoever is asking for that information. If you'd like to add anything to that, Alison, you can.
You should be a politician.
I try not to be.
You sort of like almost
I've
answered it by not answering it. That's really good. Well done.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks. There you go.
You can follow up with the gentleman over lunch.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Happy to talk about it.
There's a lot of nuances in there, and FAR's role is very much to provide information to our growers to enable them to decide how they want to use that information for their farm business and or in compliance. Although we were part of the dreaded Hawaka Ekanoa, we didn't sign up for our growers to meet any of those targets because we couldn't. We didn't have a mandate to do that. But what we wanted to do was make sure that we were round the table so that we could see what was likely to come out so that we could do the R&D and provide the support to our growers. So we're in a slightly different situation to some of the other sectors who did have the mandate from their farmers or growers to actually meet those targets. And obviously methane, being a livestock emission, is not actually sort of a core part of FAR's role and responsibility. But it's such a political space, it's very hard to have a logical, sensible discussion. Is there any other questions for Dirk? Yes, down here. Can we get...
Just with respect to the e-check,
Yep.
Is there any more development going on with that in regards to, like, it just says how many tonnes of urea you're putting on, but obviously if you broadcast that out in the direct sunlight,
Yep.
versus throwing it in a strip till, which is 200 mils under the ground, you know, that doesn't actually take any account of that, whereas obviously if you're bearing it, you're not losing anywhere near the level of nitrogen, etc. off.
Yep.
So that's what I mean. That's where it gets tricky, where I've looked at the e-check thing on mine and thought, well, that's just, it's only asking for nitrogen, how much lime I've put on, how many livestock are gone, and how many trees I planted in some certain time period. I can't remember exactly, but...
Yep. Yeah, I can expand on that. Yeah, so it's a really good question, and my general answer to that is that greenhouse gas emission science has been slow to this point, but now it's getting a big boot in the backside. There's been historically not a lot of research done on measuring emissions from cropping systems, but we are making traction there, and through our involvement in the He Waka Ekanoa process, etc., we've actually started to have those discussions of what bits of what practices on farm are there that we've got enough evidence for that reduce emissions. First one is actually burying fert. So if it goes down in the strip, you cut volatilisation out of the picture and you should have a lower emission number. That one will be an easy one to get passed through the, I guess, the science committee that approves kind of emission factors that are associated with it. I guess as we move towards more on-farm emission reporting, there's actually a lot more structure around all of this stuff. And what we're hoping is that by putting effort in, growers can get recognised for their good management on farm. And the practices that feature an e-check or anything like that are actually approved essentially at that central government type high level, so that we don't promote something that you get a discount for an e-check, for example, but then when you go to pay for it, it disappears. So we want all the practices that we promote to actually have value for you and not create more confusion. So yeah, slowly, but I think within the next 12 months we should have an approved method, and we're actually consulting with growers over the next couple of months around that method, and have something out in front of you that you could look at. So progress is happening. It's just there isn't much of a song and dance being made about it, but hear your point, and I think it's a really good one.
Okay, I think we'll just, have we got one more, and then we've got to get on to the grower panel.
Yeah, far away. I think there's a, there you go. I said, sorry. Oh, yep.
Yep, I've got one, Dirk.
Righto. Would you mind putting your hand up? I've got no idea who's speaking. Oh, sorry, okay.
Sorry.
Complete wrong spot. There you go. Yep, far away.
You can't see me if I stand sideways. In New Zealand, all the regulatory changes are aimed at penalising. In the States at the moment, there's a big move for corn growers to be able to calculate their carbon intensity.
Yep.
And it's coming down through some sort of rules that are going to be foisted upon the biofuels sector. And as it's going, if you can have a lower carbon intensity than the average, you're going to be able to get a premium with your biofuels purchaser, your corn purchaser. So what is happening in New Zealand to make it worthwhile to do something? At the moment, it's all about penalties and making us pay more. Is there anyone trying to get a system where there's some premiums for doing this stuff?
Yeah, I would love to have that crystal ball to give the answer. Would you have an answer, Alison?
Well, I mean, it's not an answer that you'll like, but basically, if you look at all of the work that's done, all the market analysis work that's done, you're not going to get a premium for any of this. You're going to have the right to be able to market your product. Yes, there are government incentives to make transitions to more sustainable systems that other countries have done, and they're creating all sorts of perverse outcomes around food production. New Zealand government has chosen not to go down that track. The reality is, if you think you're going to get a premium for reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, I think you're going to be sadly disappointed. I think it's just going to allow you to be able to continue to sell your product. And that's the reality of what the Nestlés say that they will incentivize and they will support, but the reality is that at this moment in time, if you're a maize grower, these are changes that you're going to have to make in order to be compliant and in order to be able to retain your markets. It would be wonderful if people gave you a premium for regenerative agriculture or whatever, but all of the analysis, all of the market analysis said that that's very unlikely. So you can want it, but the reality is that the chances are it's not going to come your way, and you could sort of say, "Oh, poor me, it's not fair, I'm playing the victim." But the reality is that every sector is being put under the same kind of sustainability, environmental, regulatory issues. Agriculture is no different worldwide. And it's just that agriculture in New Zealand, being such the dominant economy that drives the GDP, is under the spotlight. But if you're a small business owner, you're going through all the same things. So I'll say it, you've got to get over it. You've got to listen to what the markets are saying, and you've got to be able to respond. Because if you don't, you're going to get left behind. And I knew that you weren't going to like it. That's why we're moving on to the grower panel.